And hello, everyone. Welcome to the Real Estate Show on KCMX News Media 880 and on YouTube at realestateshowOregon.com. I'm Pete Belcastro. Sitting over there is Joe Brett. This is Alice Lema. We're all brokers with John L. Scott in Southern Oregon. We get together with you, well, once a week here on KCMX and on YouTube to talk about real estate issues facing all of us as homeowners, as renters, investors. And today, do we have a great guest? Alice, why don't you introduce Matt Brinkley to us, because this topic affects every one of us whether you own, buy, rent, whatever.
Game
House
changer.
Bill 2001, as Joe says, is a game changer. Okay.
Well, Matt Brinkley is in charge of our Medford planning, and he's been here for several years. He has a great background, and I'd love to hear Matt tell us a little bit about himself, and then we can jump into this exciting topic.
So you came from, where'd you come from? You came from Michigan, right?
Came from Michigan about 5 years ago.
Does Michigan have different land use rules than Oregon?
Michigan does not have a lot of land use rules. I mean, very few states have rules the way that Oregon does.
Was it crazy for you when you came to Oregon? Did you see all this stuff and so, my goodness, what am I getting myself into?
No, not really. I mean, I think it was presented to me as a very unique system that required a lot of experience and expertise. And the idea I think some people have is that it's this magical thing, and it's hard to understand. And it's not. It's all in black and white, like we're talking about House Bill 2001 today.
It is unique.
It is unique, but it's not something that is totally impenetrable.
Yeah.
I mean, you can figure it out.
We're so old here that we can go back to when the original Land Conservation and Development Commission hearings back in 1970 were going on, which created this whole system. And how controversial it was. My goodness. I mean, you think today cap and trade, that thing was huge.
And there's underlying undercurrents that are going to come with this new bill that harken back to that time of LCDC.
Now, Joe, of course, from works down at RVTV at SOU, you attend many of the meetings that Matt oversees, right? The planning department.
And if I don't attend them, I chapter them afterwards. So I'm unavoidably in tune with all of our local planning commissions in Ashland, Jackson County, and Medford. And since I've had a real estate license, it has been fascinating to be sitting on that process and see it transpire.
All right. And how busy is Medford Planning Department in terms of applications and things as we sit here before we talk about this stuff? How busy are you right now?
That's a great question.
Yeah, what's
I'm glad
going
you
on?
asked. We had our busiest quarter for the past 5 years, and in our last quarter for this past fiscal year.
What does it mean, the busiest quarter? What does that
mean? So we
had
33 applications in March alone, and then several others, quite a few others in the other months surrounding that. But that was the busiest March, the busiest single month we've had in the past 5 years.
And that's for single-family housing?
That's for all sorts of stuff.
Commercial.
We do have a lot of stuff going on with residential development, subdivisions, land divisions, planned unit developments, things like that. But we've also seen a lot of industrial and commercial development. If you drive down Garfield, right around Garfield and Center, you've seen all of the commercial development going on there. We have another hotel that's beginning development there behind Cracker Barrel and
a hotel, another hotel,
another hotel,
really,
and we have demand for it. And a lot of that demand is generated by
U.S. Cellular Community Park. Oh my goodness.
Well, this is so exciting because it means our economy is getting better, our local economy is getting better, and there's a lot of hopefulness that these businesses are bringing when they start doing this kind of construction.
Yeah, I didn't know there was that much going on though, so that's good to hear.
Yeah,
and we're growing. We see all these statistics, that come out with us on the MLS every year. We see we're growing in East Medford, right? In the Southeast Medford. Isn't that where it is? Wasn't that where most of this is happening? Or where's it happening around the city?
Well, there's certainly a lot of growth in East Medford when it comes to residential development, because East Medford is the last part of the city that has large tracts of undeveloped land.
Okay.
So you can go in and do, 100-lot subdivision. You can't do that in West Medford, Southwest Medford. That said, we do have expansion areas that have come in with our urban growth boundary amendment that was recently approved that are in West and Southwest Medford. So we anticipate seeing a lot of development out there, not quite on the scale that we'll see with East Medford, where most of that land is located.
Yeah, Alice, you see a lot of construction, new stuff. You sell a lot of that. What do you think is happening in the construction world around us?
Well, I think we're quickly running out of flat lots.
Yep. Lots, okay.
And while we were having a housing shortage in the purchase market, people did want new construction, and it was hard for them to be able to do that.
Yeah.
It really was.
Well, we're seeing a lot of action. Certainly, there's a lot of action going on in new construction, and the prices we're seeing prices, and they're getting up there, and that's forcing, again, a lot of people can't afford those anymore, right? I mean, is that where we're hitting that level now in new construction?
Well, I think that the prices have come down a lot along with the interest rates, but I think that this bill that was just passed in our state of Oregon is going to bring some interesting construction side effects, because you're now going to be allowed to do some extra units in some cases. And Matt, maybe you can tell us more about that and what you see is going to impact on the construction for our area.
It'll be interesting to see what happens. The bread and butter of the construction industry, the development community here in the Rogue Valley has been single-family detached housing, quite frankly.
Yep,
and,
sure.
And that's not to say that Medford doesn't have a diverse housing inventory.
Right.
We do. More so than a community like Bend, for example. But still, it favors single-family residential, and it'll be interesting to see whether or not developers embrace the opportunity that HB 2001 provides, which is to allow developers to make the choice to build a duplex, triplex, quad, cottage cluster development within a single-family neighborhood.
Okay, so what does that mean? So if I see a lot, Alice, help me. If I see a lot, right, and I want to buy a lot, it's a single-family unit. I can put any of those four buildings on it, correct?
Correct.
All right. What does that do? Okay. What do you think of that? What do you think of that?
I think it's a mixed blessing. We certainly have a need for more of this type of housing. Some people are excited about it. Some people aren't. Some people absolutely do not want to live next door to anything more than one house. But there's also a huge amount of people that have elders that really need to have them on the property, and they haven't been able to do that.
But what do you think? What do you think, Joe?
Well, I think going forward with good planning, you can have areas where the duplexes or fourplexes are at in a neighborhood. You could also have some room for some single-family residences wrapped in. It depends on the size of the development, and I think the thing nobody wants to see is
what?
Single-family home, open lot, single-family home, fourplex, squeezed in the middle of that. But is it going to open up? Is it going to open up the door for? Is it going to open up the door to every lot in that's out there?
Have you driven to Ashland lately? I mean, that's what that
pretty
is.
often.
I know. It's just all the time.
Matt brought a map, and it's interesting to hear and see. If you're on YouTube, you can see this.
Well, here, hold on. All right, give it to me. Here.
And maybe Matt, you can talk about what is the availability.
All right,
exactly.
What are we looking at here?
Yeah, so the map that you have in front of you, you'll see the kind of pink color. I don't know how that's going to reproduce.
Yeah, we don't know either. Yeah.
Over YouTube, but it's the stuff that you see that's kind of colored in there, red or pink. And
a little closer.
And those are
That's
residential
That's
lots
perfect.
that are zoned SFR4, SFR6. Those are predominant single-family zones, what have been single-family zones in the past.
All right.
And all of those lots have been developed. They've been built out. So unless those lots are redeveloped, unless somebody comes in and demolishes that single-family home and puts a duplex, triplex, or quad on that lot, those are not going to change. At most, you might get an accessory dwelling unit. The City of Medford's allowed for that for a long time. The City of Medford's had a very generous policy when it comes to accessory dwelling units.
Does this only work for new construction? I mean, I can't go into if I have a single-family house on a lot in Medford and I want to add a duplex to it, can I do that under this rule?
You would have to meet the site development criteria. I think it would be difficult to
the
do
lot
that.
size and the setbacks.
If I have because there's a lot of big lots around Medford. With that, I mean, does this apply anything to something already built, or is it? Why would they put it in just for the future building, future construction? Is that what this whole bill's about?
Well, it's difficult to know exactly what it's about.
Like a lot of bills.
Okay.
I mean, the
come out of
motivation,
Salem.
I think, was very clear, and it was to provide a wider range of housing within a neighborhood that has single-family housing. I mean, because that's the vast majority of neighborhoods, not just in cities in Oregon, but throughout the entire United States.
So it sounds like you should be able to add, if you have an existing home on a single-family lot, that you ought to be able to use this to add to it. But
you might be able to do that, but there are also site development criteria. So even though the zoning has to allow for this use, it doesn't mean that you can necessarily build it. We still have setbacks from your property lines. We have maximum lot coverages and things like that. And what will be interesting is to see how cities adjust those rules to meet the kind of implied requirements that HB 2001 also expresses in that bill.
But you're heading down that road where Medford has been very proactive and working very hard. The additional dwelling units.
Okay.
I think there is a number of lots and a number of owners, property owners, that have been lobbying and been waiting for those restrictions to ease a little bit. And there's some great new opportunities out there for citizens in Medford to be able to accommodate elderly with a mother-in-law house or that type of
or
thing.
have income
and being able to use, if you have the proper size lot and can meet those setbacks that are required for any building and any development.
Do you see lots, say in East Medford, say over in the Alice, or say in Mahar, where Mahar's building? Somebody buy a lot like that? Are they subject to CC&Rs, or would they have single family unit? Would they be able to add, or is it again by the subject of the setbacks and things like that you're talking about?
It's really the site development standards, those clear and objective standards.
So it's not going to apply to a lot of places then.
Potentially, no. I mean, I think the reality is that you have development costs that are high because construction costs are high right now. We have infrastructure constraints. So a single-family house generates so much, demand for
Systems
sanitary sewer and things like that.
I would think.
Yeah, exactly. And so multifamily housing has always been more expensive to construct. It's a lot less expensive on a per unit basis, on per square foot basis, to build, a 2,500 square foot house on a quarter acre lot.
But you also get traffic impacts and things that come with those multifamily.
What good does this impact do in the city of Portland, where you've got small lots on small places most of the city? I mean, I don't understand. After listening to you now, Matt, I'm totally confused now. Why were they pushing for this so much? If what I'm hearing you say, you still can't just go do it. You got to follow the other rules of setbacks, systems development charges, blah, blah, blah. You got to meet all that.
Yeah, I mean, I think in some cases people will do it. There'll be some infill opportunities where somebody, instead of building a single-family detached dwelling, they're going to put in a triplex.
Yeah.
But I don't think you're going to see entire neighborhoods converting over. And a lot of this has to do with the economics that you have within a particular community. Right. In Berkeley, California, it might make sense to buy $1.5 million pre-World War II bungalow, knock it down, and build 4 new condominiums because you can sell each one of them for $1.5 million. Yeah. We do not have quite the same problem here, right? Yeah. And we do have a problem with housing affordability, and HB 2001 is trying to address that.
Well, hold those thoughts, because I want to talk to you about how do we get more housing here around the city, and what do we need to build here to help along there? Because Alan, we all talk about this every day of trying to get the needs of what people are wanting, and we'll talk about that more. So we're with Matt Brinkley. He's the planning director from the City of Medford, the planning department there. Joe, Pete, and Alice, we're coming right back. The Real Estate Show continues here on KCMX and YouTube at realestateshoworegon.com right after this. Welcome back to the Real Estate Show on KCMX News Media 880 and on YouTube. realestateshoworegon.com is our address. Pete Belcastro, Joe Brett, and Alice Lema here with you today. Thanks for joining us. It's post 4th of July of 2019. Woo-hoo. We're in the middle of summer here. We're talking with Matt Brinkley. He's the fellow in the middle here from the City of Medford. He's the planning director for the City of Medford. Everything that happens in our county, it comes through Medford, right, Joe? I mean, let's face it. It's the center. They call it the center of everything. And as Medford develops and goes, I mean, so many other places are. Don't
know if Danny Jordan would agree, but
anyway. So we're talking about housing in this House Bill 2001 that we just concluded here, that just passed, and what that might do. Alice, what do you think about all this?
Well, I'm really curious about to hear more about the population limits, because there's a couple of numbers floating around. There's a 10,000 number, 10,000 people, and 25,000 people. What's going on with that?
So there are a couple different categories of community or city that this legislation affects. So cities over 25,000 have to allow for all of these different types of what they call middle housing. So
25,000 or more.
25,000 or more.
So here it's just City of Medford.
Just the City of Medford.
So
Ashland's a little shy of that.
Yeah,
Central Points. Right. They don't have to comply with that.
Grants Pass?
Grants Pass, 35,000.
Yeah. So Grants Pass and Medford, the two would be affected by it. Okay.
But communities or cities, I should say, that are between 10,000, 25,000 still have to allow for duplexes in single-family residential zones. That's something that Medford has done, as far as I know, and I haven't been here that long, but from my perspective, relatively speaking, since the beginning of time. I mean, that's same with accessory dwelling units. We've had really generous policies with both of those housing types. So that's something that we've allowed for a long time. We've also allowed single-family attached housing, so townhomes, in other words, in single-family residential zones as well. So Medford, from the beginning, has really kind of been ahead of the curve, and certainly ahead of a lot of other communities. Some of our peers, like, a certain city in Central Oregon.
You can say the B word.
So, Medford is really pretty well positioned to make a transition in dealing with the changes that could come with this legislation.
And Medford's been really in front of this. I spoke to one of your planners earlier today, and she was saying that at the end of 2018, you started making some changes on your own. Why don't you talk about some of that? Yeah,
so housing is one of the top priorities for City Council and the city in general, and certainly one of my top priorities, planning director, because we do have a shortage of housing, and so we have a housing affordability and availability problem. We need to make sure that we're producing housing that matches the needs of our current and future population. Our population is changing pretty significantly. There's a number out from the AARP that says something like half of households, and I forget over what period of time, are going to be single-person households.
Single person
as we age.
Absolutely, yes.
And the needs of one person living in a home are significantly different than the needs of, like, my family with kids and that sort of thing. And so we need to make sure that we're addressing that need.
All right, but I hear him year after year. We're only building, for the most part, single-family homes and some apartments, right? We don't
in
build
Southern Oregon
around here. We don't really build much else.
I think the inventory is pretty well balanced. I think it needs to probably be a little bit better balanced as we change demographically. But you can see some really exciting projects here being built now. If you drive down 99 at Stewart and 99,
so
you have Stewart Meadows. So that's a project.
Is that apartments above there, or complex, or condos, or
So you have multi-unit buildings that are right on Myers Lane, and then you have some duplexes that are set back behind Myers Lane. And there'll be some additional apartments in future phases of that development. But that's a very exciting mixed-use, walkable community that is being built here in Southern Oregon. And in my opinion, one of the most exciting projects really throughout the entire state, and it's happening here. And I just want to make sure that people are aware that this kind of stuff is going on.
Are those going to be able to be purchased, or are they rentals?
I think the apartments they're rental apartments. I don't know about the townhouses or the duplexes.
They're leased. Okay, all right. I wonder what they're going to go for.
Are they 55 and over, or are they?
I don't think they're age restricted.
They're not.
I don't think they're. We don't have very many 55 and older developments. We have mobile home parks. We have assisted living. So what are the future plans for over 55 developments in Medford? Are there any?
The Manor Pacific Retirement Systems has for a long time been envisioning its future over at Centennial. And with the recently approved expansion of our urban growth boundary amendment, they are finally going to have the opportunity to realize that vision that they've had for 20 years.
And those going to be?
I lost track of it. What is it? I'm trying to think of what that.
Are those going to be cottages? Over 55 cottages?
Affordability for local people, or for people coming in from outside? That's the problem that we've faced. The
most of their clientele
is recruited from outside to come here.
Yeah, that's possible.
Anyway.
Of course, people retiring here could take advantage of that as well. But it's age restricted. This is an active retirement community, I think is what they're kind of billing
and wasn't
it as.
Twin Creeks doing some kind of a planned community over there? That direction?
So Twin Creeks is an example of another great, interesting, I think, really vital kind of neighborhood that's been built with a variety of housing. So you do have you have senior housing, in an apartment kind of format. You have single family housing. You have other higher density housing, and then some smaller age in place universal design.
Why doesn't the city? Why doesn't the city
2 bedrooms?
require
they have a nice
more?
Mix.
I'm sorry. Well, why doesn't the city require more of these new developments to have more different types of housing in them. I mean, I'm talking about the East Medford ones. I mean, everything there is the same. They're all single-family units, small, but I don't see duplexes, triplexes.
No, you don't.
You really want government to tell you what you can and can't build with the land that you own?
Look, they tell me to do everything else, so why can't the city do that?
I'm not saying it's a good trend, yeah.
Okay, but if the city council's position is they want to fix the housing problem, they're going to have to make some sort of an incentive for somebody along the way in order to do this. Otherwise, we're going to continue to get what we get, which is the single-family units. We're getting them on smaller lots, bigger houses on smaller lots, et cetera, and that's what we see all the time.
and Matt, there is a good consortium of developers and city staff, and there are groups that are working on these issues together and kind of formulating some game plan, trying to bring some vision to how we can go forward and make it work for everyone.
Tiny homes, we're talking about tiny homes, that kind of thing.
Yeah, so the city created the Housing Advisory Commission about a year ago, and that body is composed of representatives from for-profit, not-for-profit housing developers, all sorts of perspectives on that commission. And their charge is to come up with policy